Hello and welcome. I'm Jake and this is Mysterious Planet, where we delve into some of the world's greatest mysteries, including the supernatural, scientific and archaeological mysteries, cryptozoology, true crime, urban legends, and much more. Tonight on the show I will be speaking with Dr. Darren Naish, a top paleontologist, naturalist, and cryptozoologist. We'll be discussing topics such as the possibility of sea monsters lurking in the ocean depths, the mysterious big cats of the UK, cryptids such as Bigfoot and the Jersey Devil, mysteries of paleontology, as well as other topics. Thanks for tuning in to Mysterious Planet. Alright, hello and welcome everybody. We have another awesome guest with us here today on Mysterious Planet. He is a vertebrate paleontologist, science writer, and the creator of the Tetrapod Zoology blog. He is also the author of the book, Hunting Monsters, Cryptozoology, and the Reality Behind the Myths. Joining us all the way from the UK, please welcome Dr. Darren Naish. Darren, thanks so much for coming on with us today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
All right. So first off, I'd like to talk a bit about your book, Hunting Monsters. For those listening, it's a book all about cryptozoology, which is the search for and study of animals whose existence or survival is disputed, for everyone listening who doesn't know. Could you go into detail about how you went about writing this book and the research that went into writing it?
The book is, in a way, I was going to say sort of the end of the process, but it's where I am right now in terms of thoughts that have developed over, a number of years. I've been interested for, pretty much all my life in mystery animals, and initially became interested in the study of mystery animals because I thought there likely were new animals to find, and over the years, as I've kind of, read a lot more about it, investigated some of the cases, some of the stories, various of the anecdotes, looked at various bits of the evidence, I've kind of changed my ideas over time. And I've for a few years have wanted to do a book like this, but have actually pitched the idea to several publishers. The fact that I finally did write a book on this that deals with the subject in this way is purely to do with the fact that I was approached by a publisher that was, basically asked for it and was prepared to pay me to do it. So that's kind of why I did it. But it is, for me, the culmination of many years of investigating mystery animals. And I wanted to provide a take on the superstars of the field. So your Yeti and Bigfoot and famous lake monsters and famous sea monsters, the African alleged living dinosaurs. I wanted to basically... my take on mystery animals is not to come in as a skeptic and dismiss everything and say we don't need to take this seriously, which is the approach of some skeptics, but it's rather to say that, well, there's this body of, air quotes, evidence, there's this body of data that exists. How do we best explain this? And I've tried best as I can to come up with kind of scientific or evidence-led ideas that allow us to evaluate the how likely it is that these creatures exist, and also look at what people have said about them. I'm really interested in how other people have tried to rationalize and explain mystery animals as real creatures.
Awesome. That's great. So let's jump into the topic of the ocean. I know it's something that interests you. It interests me to a great extent. I recently read a statistic that to date, we have explored a little less than 5% of the world's oceans. That, to me, is a shocking figure. When you see a statistic like that, what goes through your mind?
It's been said that I think more people have set foot on the moon than have set foot on the bottom of the ocean, and it's clear that we don't know as much as we really should at this stage about certainly the deep open ocean. That kind of claim is a little bit inaccurate because what's the point? What do you actually learn from walking on the bottom of the ocean? I mean, certainly we want to have surveys in appropriate areas so we, have a handle on the ecology and the diversity of living things living in deep places. But the fact is, a lot of it is, fairly samey. You seem to have the same species living from like one ocean basin to the next. But yeah, there's clearly a ton of stuff to find still, and every indication from species that are described year on year, large and small, of all groups of organisms, everything from marine plants to reasonable sized fishes and crustaceans and whatnot, every indication that there's still like thousands of species still to discover in in remote coastal regions all around the world, but also the open ocean, actually surface waters, as well as the deep ocean. So there is a lot of stuff to find. A lot of it is undersampled. In terms of, if you're interested in mystery animals, what does this mean for the superstars, for your big animals? And I think everybody you speak to who's informed on this would say, well, yeah, it's conceivable, it's certainly possible that there are a few large animals out there to find. I think everyone takes that idea quite seriously. But a few, I mean, every study that's been done indicates that it's we probably are not looking for multiple species of kind of new marine mammals and so on. There's going to be like a few large deep sea cartilaginous fishes and bony fishes, and maybe one or two new whales, that kind of thing. But clearly we have a lot to find. And in terms of like the broader areas of science, I mean, we have there's so much potential in the oceans, as goes exploiting the resources there. And people are going to have to make the transition to using all kinds of marine resources in the decades to come as things get tougher with growing populations and climate change and whatnot. So people are going to be looking at the kind of sea worms they can eat and what algae you can survive on. That's going to become a bigger thing, and what impact is that going to have on biodiversity of big things in the ocean? That's a good question. I guess we'll find out.
Right. I remember watching, I think it was Blue Planet, that documentary about the ocean, and I remember the narrator, David Attenborough, he said something like, I think he said, new species are discovered on almost every submersible dive. Nearly every. Oh, yeah. That's amazing to me. But at the same time, it makes sense, because it's like, it's such a vast, the ocean is so vast that it's like the odds of you not finding something are slimmer than the odds of you actually finding something.
Yeah, there's clearly, as you say, enormous potential in huge areas that have yet to be, properly investigated. Also, new technology is allowing us to explore new areas. A lot of the stuff in actual exploring deep sea vents and deep polar waters, that's all only happened in the last couple of decades. But then you've also, combined with these factors we're talking about, you've also got the fact that there aren't really that many scientists that are out there, collecting and studying new species. Not really. I mean, yeah, sure, right now there's going to be hundreds of people that are studying obscure fish and deep sea cephalopods and crustaceans and whatnot. But in terms of the number that you actually need, as goes the number of species that are there, that is a problem. That's lower than it should be, and that's becoming more of a problem worldwide. There are more and more scientists over time, I'm sure, but there are less and less people that are actually doing the sort of pioneering work, discovering new species in remote environments and then actually studying them, describing them and naming them, just because the shape of, how we do science has changed. So there's kind of... You look at any of the technical journals where people are describing new marine species, new stuff all the time. Every single issue of the journals will have new species of, whatever obscure gobies or deep sea squids or whatever. But in terms of the number of people that are doing that work, that's getting smaller over time, which is kind of ironic because we need more people studying that stuff to better catalogue the species that are still out there.
Right. Well, that is amazing and very exciting. Right now, I'd like to kind of segue into this whole idea of, prehistoric survivors. I mean, we have the coelacanth, because it's something you've covered in some of your articles. In an article of yours, you mentioned something that you call the prehistoric survivor paradigm. Is that correct? And Could you explain for people listening what that is and what it means for the hypothesis that prehistoric marine animals might still exist?
If you want to interpret this body of eyewitness accounts where people say they see unusual animals in the sea, then how do you actually explain what people say they saw? Now, I'm one of a number of researchers who argues that a lot of sightings of unusual marine animals, and it doesn't just go for marine animals, it goes for freshwater animals and land animals as well, but they don't necessarily relate to accurate descriptions of real creatures that people have actually seen. There are obviously a number of hoaxes and, tall tales and whatnot. Then there's also a number of mistakes, and I think the bulk of mystery animal reports are mistakes. They're people seeing known objects. When I say objects, I mean things like floating wood or wave or wake effects, or they're seeing known animal species like unusual whales or water birds or big seals or whatever. They're making mistakes. So I think that accounts for a significant number of the encounters. But then there's another set that are more difficult to explain, and the most popular idea, going all the way back to the basically the middle of the 1800s, has been that are people actually seeing animals that we know of from the fossil record? And the most popular animals, when you think about sea monsters, are plesiosaurs, these long-necked, flippered group of reptiles that the fossil record shows us died out about 66 million years ago. So once people started, those animals were first discovered in the 1820s. They were sort of familiar to the public by the 1840s and 1850s. And when sea monster reports were, during the 1800s, taken seriously as could these be descriptions of unknown animals, people put two and two together and they said, could these eyewitness accounts be descriptions of these animals that we know from fossils? And that view has survived obviously right up to the present. Is in one of the most popular ideas in the whole sphere of cryptozoology, the study of mystery animals, the idea that sea monsters are not only real, they're not only new species, but they are survivors from prehistory. That is the prehistoric survivor paradigm, and it's been endorsed, supported by all the kind of classic authors who wrote about mystery animal reports. It's the main favoured idea of fiction and sci-fi, and if you're making a movie, or even if you're making like a documentary about sea monsters or lake monsters or river monsters, you do tend to latch onto the prehistoric survivor paradigm as well. And it's really popular. It's huge. It's like unshakable, and it sort of just will not die no matter what's said about it. And there's two reasons that it is basically endorsed by people even today. The first one is they just point to they say that people are describing creatures that sound like animals like plesiosaurs, alive, as I say, 66-ish million years ago. And the second thing is they say that the fossil record is grossly incomplete. There's a lot of stuff, there must be tons of stuff we haven't found, and we know that lineages of living things can sometimes survive for a long period of time, tens of millions of years, without leaving any fossils behind. And as you've already mentioned, people tend to point to the coelacanth, which originally discovered off the coast of East Africa during the 1930s, and then with the second species discovered in the 1990s off the coast of Indonesia. People point to those things. They say, haha, look, coelacanth, that proves that the plesiosaurs could persist. Now, it's a long and complex argument, and I don't want to go into it. I talk about it for hours, and I've written about it at great length, but I don't think the prehistoric survivor paradigm, or PSP as it's known, I don't think it's got much going for it. If you actually look in detail at the eyewitness accounts concerned, they don't really describe animals that sound like plesiosaurs or any specific animals from prehistory. They're often kind of vaguer and looser, and when they refer to specific details of the anatomy of the animals, they don't describe anatomical features that really allow you to be confident that you are talking about animals that are at all similar to plesiosaurs. For example, some of the famous sea monster accounts concerned describe, furry manes, or they describe mammal-like faces, or they describe humps on the back. They don't describe any of the key things that you would need to show that you're dealing with a specific group of animals, from prehistory. And there are better alternative explanations. If people did see an animal, well, if they describe it as furry and having a mammal-like face and having humps on its back, what's more likely, that they saw like a weird plesiosaur or a descendant of a plesiosaur, or that they saw something else like a giant weird seal. And I would say that a really important thing in science is the principle of parsimony, the idea that you should go for the simplest, the simplest answers are the better answers. Don't need to come up with a complex alternative unless you really have to. And then the second thing, this point of view of the fossil record, well, as a paleontologist, it is true there's tons of stuff we haven't found, and it's true that we find new stuff all the time. But in more general terms, the idea that a lineage of big vertebrate animals can persist for tens of millions of years without leaving any fossils is not supported by the fossil record, and it's especially not supported by the fossil record of coelacanths. Their fossil record is kind of unusual. They're very different in many ways from animals like plesiosaurs. They do have this gap in their fossil record. There's a couple of possible coelacanths that come from rocks younger than those of about 17 million years old, but towards the end of their history, coelacanths seem to have been doing something very odd. They're becoming smaller, specialised for a deep-sea environment, and their bones, when you find them in isolation, are often quite difficult to identify. And I think that makes them very different from the animals that are favoured by the prehistoric survivor paradigm proponents. So there's even more angles to it than that. I mean, like I say, I've written about it at length, given whole talks on it and stuff, some of which are available online. But I'm not a fan of the prehistoric survivor paradigm, and I don't really see why we should endorse it. It's kind of a silly idea these days, I think. I may be biased, but...
Yeah, awesome. Well, so then when we're talking about, because we have all of these strange sightings, it's like I've heard it broken down in this sort of way by, I believe it was Michael Shermer broke this down. I don't know if you know of Michael Shermer. He's published Skeptic magazine.
Oh, yeah.
He used this example with UFOs, and I'd like to attribute it to this as well. He said there's a large percentage, 90-something percent of these sightings that can be explained easily. It was in this case, a sea turtle. It was a whale. It was an animal that already exists. It was a log. It was a wake. Anything. But then he said, then there's like this small percentage, 2% or so, where it's like, okay, what about that? We can't quite explain that. So when we're talking about that 2% in this scenario, you're saying you're not a fan of the prehistoric survivor paradigm. That shouldn't be used to describe that small percent. What can describe that small percent?
That's nicely put. I like your take on it.
Thank you.
Well, we in any mysterious phenomenon, you're right. Even if we do explain, let's say 98, 99% of all the cases, what about the ones that we can't explain? And the kind of grossest problem, the sort of biggest problem there is do we actually have to explain them? Are any of them absolutely compelling enough that we have to come up with an unusual explanation? The prehistoric survivor paradigm would be quite a radical explanation, because it would go against what we currently understand of the fossil record, what we currently understand about the species we've sampled over time. If you look in particular at the cases concerned, and if we're sticking with sea monsters here, there's a handful of accounts that can't really be explained away. They can't be explained as sightings of whales or turtles or any known species. They can't be explained as mistakes, as people see in logs or unusual waves or whatever. They do seem to be sort of, if you accept them at face value, seem to be solid descriptions of weird things that if you accept them would require you come up with some crazy novel hypothesis, some novel idea. But my point is, and I go into this in the book, is if we look at those specific sightings, and now we are down to like a handful of accounts, are they actually definitely good enough to convince us that there is a required explanation for them? The immediate problem with the handful of sightings that you're left with is that they don't describe the same thing. They all describe radically different creatures, not creatures that sound like they could be different interpretations of the same species. They're all like completely different things. So some of them describe like big multi-humped animals with an erect neck and even like a long flicking tongue in one case. Others describe like a long serpentine like a ribbon-like creature that moves by leaving multiple undulations. Others describe like broad-bodied, paddled creatures. They're so different that there isn't at the moment a compelling reason for you to think that there is like one explanation you need to favour. I think instead what's happening is that people are describing they're experiencing something. They've witnessed something like a big creature in the water, presumably. Although, even in cases that seem pretty solid, you've always got the possibility that people are lying or outright hoaxing. But the main thing for me about mystery animals, sea monsters and the others as well, is this cultural component. The fact that if people go and look at, mysterious bodies of water, whether that's big lakes or rivers or the open ocean, or, they look at deep stretches of water, is every person in every single nation, every single culture, we've all got this idea that there's something there, that there are, we're like culturally primed, we're expectant that we will see something unusual, and so we experience something, we'll see something, and we'll into a monster. Now, this always sounds like kind of the lazy skeptic's, response or explanation to mysterious phenomena. But the fact is that what you describe to another person is not actually the same as what you remember. And what you remember is not actually the same as what you've literally perceived with your senses. And what you've perceived with your senses is literally not the same as what you have actually seen. And if you think about experiences in your own life, I can think of things in mine where what I remember quite clearly, I can remember like a distinct shape, a distinct object that I saw. If you actually do go and check specifically what it was you saw, it's like way less impressive. It's like it wasn't clear that it was the shape of a plesiosaur or a black cat, or as I remember it. I think that is a big part of it, this kind of cultural expectation that we will see things. Having said all of that, I still am open to the possibility that people are, on occasion, seeing undiscovered big animals. That is not beyond the realms of possibility, and it does match with what I was saying a moment ago about there being new species out there to find. There probably still are a couple. So are there some sea monsters out there? I don't discount that as a possibility, but at the moment there just isn't the consistency, there isn't the number, there isn't the robustness in the cases to allow us to really take that away as the best explanation.
Awesome.
Sure.
Could you go into detail about your favorite sea monster eyewitness account?
Well, that's a good question, because there's a whole bunch of them. There's a lot of. I tried to think, do I have a favourite? I don't have a favourite. I like some of them for different reasons. So, what used to really kind of convince me that there were real sea monsters, and this segs back into what you were saying just a minute ago about how do we explain the unexplainable ones, is there's two in particular that always sounded to me really solid. It's like they can't be explained as known animals. There's the Daedalus or Daedalus encounter of 1848, which happened off the coast of Namibia, that's in the South Atlantic, off the Atlantic coast of Africa, and the crew of a ship reported this giant, blunt-headed, black with a white underside sea creature, and the ship's captain, Captain Mackay, came back to England and said, if this was a person that I knew, I would have been able to recognise them by their facial features. And there's this fantastic series of woodcut illustrations done for the Illustrated London News. And it's like, wow, this just doesn't match anything we know. And there was an argument at the time, a prominent scientist at the time, Richard Owen, based at the Natural History, later based at the Natural History Museum in London, he said it was like a big seal, like an elephant seal on an iceberg, and that these people had made a stupid mistake. Other people said it was most likely a long-necked plesiosaur type creature. The 1840s was the height of plesiosaur craze, when people were beginning to interpret sea monster sightings as those of surviving plesiosaurs, in keeping with the prehistoric survivor paradigm. And yeah, it was like, wow, this is like one of the best sea monster reports ever. And the second one, of the classics, 1905, the Valhalla incident. This is also in the Atlantic, and it's off the coast of Brazil. And from a research yacht called the Valhalla, two naturalists, Edmund Meade Waldo and Michael Nichol, they both observed a long-necked, blunt-headed creature with a rubbery dorsal fin that had some kind of like vertical struts in it. And again, can't be explained as anything we know. It's like, wow, this is clearly something new. This validates sea monsters. And when I got into sea monsters in an academic context within, I guess, the early 1990s, these, for me, the Daedalus and Valhalla accounts, they were, wow, that's where the action is. And, you know, I would write articles, and I have published articles where I said these show that there is big undiscovered vertebrate animals. But in recent years, and they are the classic sea monster accounts, in recent years we've come up with explanations for both of them. And it turns out that if you look at enough details and look at the anatomical details that are described, and if you do enough archival research and like look at other eyewitness accounts made at the time of the exact same accounts, sadly they ain't so impressive. So the Daedalus encounter, we've always used this famous picture done under Mackay's supervision, but there's another illustration produced by Lieutenant Edgar Drummond on the same ship. And if you think of how I've just described the Daedalus creature, this like big, blunt-headed, black creature, really awesome looking, Lieutenant Edgar Drummond's picture shows this like really boring, crappy kind of shallow thing, really close to the water's edge, totally unimpressive. And it's got like a pointed snout, and it's got like a sort of raised back, and it looks pretty much like a baleen whale of some kind. And that is almost certainly what it was. A researcher called Gary Galbraith has made a really good argument. I think it was published last year, 2015 or 2016, I can't remember, but a really good argument that it was a fin whale practicing a behaviour called surface skimming, where they swim right along the water surface with the upper jaw, with the jaws open, and so it's just the tip of the upper jaw that's projecting above the water surface, and that looks exactly like a monster's head. Yeah. It really does. It looks like kind of a serpentine, blunt-headed thing, and so there you go. That's the classic sea monster account, like explained pretty well. Then the Valhalla one of 1905, well, that one has not been as securely identified, but there is a potential explanation for it, because where the sighting was made off the coast of southern Brazil, that's a place where sea lions and fur seals do sometimes occur, and they indulge in a behaviour known as is it called sailing? It's called sailing because they stick one of their fore paddles out of the water. They're not actually using it to sail with, they're not being blown along by the wind, they do it to keep themselves cool. And in the right conditions, at the right angle, these creatures can look pretty much exactly like this Valhalla creature. And again, if you check exactly what Mead, Waldo and Nichols said, it's not so clear that they said that it was this long-necked, rubbery dorsal fin thing. There's some ambiguity in their account. And I think, I say in Hunting Monsters, I think that is probably the best explanation, that it was a wayward, misidentified sea lion. So those were until very recently always my favourite sea monster accounts, but ironically now I think both probably can be explained. Other than that, I'll tell you one of my favourites, and it's a mystery. It's in a lot of the books on sea monsters. Nobody's ever been able to track down the original or all the details, but it supposedly occurred in 1962 off the coast of Florida, and the story is that a bunch of, they were like training US Navy divers or something, training to be frogmen, and the story is that this thick fog came in, and they decided to wait it out by coming back to the dinghy, and there's like 6 of these guys, and one of them didn't come back, and then the others realised there was something wrong, and then they realised that just out of sight within the fog was a large, dangerous creature. And the story says that obscured in the fog, one by one, the men get like snatched from the boat and consumed, and they're heard like screaming and dying until there's only one left, and that's the person who obviously survived to tell the tale. And as I say, it's in several sea monster books. There's the only thing that's described about the creature is some foul stench associated with it, some like vile fishy smell, but you just, it's such a brilliant story. I love it, but you can't tell whether it's got any truth to it, whether it's a complete work of fiction. The fact that it's never been tracked down, and the fact that it's, there's no names or anything recorded, suggests quite strongly that it's a a work of fiction that somehow got into the serious literature. But what a great story, and quite a scary one if you're on a small boat at sea in the fog. And then my other favourite one is also from the early 60s, 1964, the Robert Lurk case from Hook Island in Queensland, Australia. It's actually 3 or 4 photographs that show a giant tadpole monster. And the story is that Robert Lurk, he was French, he was on holiday with his family and with a friend in Australia, and they claimed to photograph this giant tadpole monster, giant like 15 metres long, 50 foot long, and they said that it had been struck by a ship, and it had a wound on its back, and it was clearly like resting in the shallow water. And it's just, the photos are just brilliant. They do look like a giant tadpole monster, what you can imagine a weird monster would look like. And I think there's some people that are still inclined to take it seriously, but the main thing against it is the fact that before leaving for Australia, Lurk told people that he was going to make some money by hoaxing sea monster accounts. And that seems a little bit of a red flag to me. You tell people you're going to go away and fake a sea monster, and then you go away and you actually manage to get photographs of a sea monster. Could be a coincidence, but I'm inclined to think that does actually put the nail in the coffin, as it were. But I love that one, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. The photographs of that one are really spectacular and really creepy too. And I actually never knew that part of the story, that he told people that he was going to go hoax. So yeah, that does that as you put it, put the nail in the coffin. For me, I would think. I'm just kind of curious. Did you because that Hook Island one reminded me of another one I see all the time on the internet. The one where, and if you're not familiar with this one, that's fine. It's the one where the guy, it's a man with his family. He's in the Greek islands on a boat tour, and they go into a cave, and he's taking a video of and for those listening, he's taken a video of the cave, and then after, which this is like some, horror movie kind of thing, which is why I love it. After he takes the video, he rewatches it, and he notices a very strange creature in the water. He zooms in on it, and apparently biologists, some speculate it might be like a dolphin of some sort, but others say they have absolutely no clue what it could be. What's your take on that one?
So, weird story. My wife used to work in a marina for several years, and due to going to, pick her up and meet her in the evenings and so on, I spent a lot of time hanging around in marinas. And one thing I got to know quite well is the paraphernalia, the bits and pieces that people have around jetties. And one of the things that you have around jetties is a particular type of, right now I've forgotten the name of them, they're kind of squidgy plastic or rubber devices that prevent the hulls of ships and boats from banging into the jetty. Kind of like, they're generally called fenders, but there's a particular kind of fender, and it's shaped like I'm kind of making like a swan's neck with my arm and hand here. They've kind of got like a head section that's a flattened plate, and then has a down curved neck, and then the body, which is like cylindrical, is at 90 degrees to the flat part of the head, and on the head, that's the bit that actually fits on the jetty or on the side of the boat, whatever you want. Due to like the position of where like the screws are and stuff like that, they've actually got what look exactly like black eyes on either side of the head, and they've also got like a seam mark around the side, and on the top, some of them, there are various different designs of these fenders, but some of them have got like a raised central ridge. I don't know why, but they just have, due to like presumably mechanical strengthening or whatever. And as soon as I saw that photograph, I was pretty sure that it was one of those. Because they get knocked by boats and jetties, they often get squished and deformed. They also deform in the heat because they're made of PVC or whatever. And as soon as I saw that picture, what I did is I cropped the air quotes monster and composited it next to a particular kind of one of these fenders, and I put it on my Facebook wall. And Ben Radford, who's a skeptic who's written about monsters and Chupacabra and all kinds of stuff, he picked that up and said, I think this is right. And then it sort of went viral. So if you go on the internet and search for Greek hippo sea monster Darren Naish, you'll see this composite of pictures, and most people have bought it. Most people have said, I think that is the most likely explanation. A few people contacted me and said, no, I think it's more likely that it is actually a sea monster because it doesn't match exactly with the particular kind of fender that you've got in mind there. So, well, yeah, but come on, it's close enough. And I think it's a better explanation. And, plus, also, the one photograph of it, the guy was obviously looking down through the water, so you've got the refraction of the water. It's kind of warped the object, so it's not exactly it's sort of like distorted compared to like what the real thing is like. So yeah, I like that picture too, but I don't think it's an animal.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. That is mind-blowing. So let's move on here. There's a particular sound recording that's strangely been named Julia. And for those listening, it was a mysterious sound recorded in the eastern equatorial Pacific using an autonomous hydrophone array. It was heard for many thousands of miles, and it was initially dismissed as an iceberg. But then a classified image from a NASA satellite was later released, which showed an enormous shadow in the waters of Cape Adare at the time. If the shadow is indeed a living animal, it is indeed a sea monster of enormous proportions. What are your thoughts on this and other strange sounds recorded in the deep sea? I mean, could any of these sounds be massive sea monsters?
It certainly would be really cool if they were. It'd be nice if they were. Sadly, I don't think any of them are. For a bunch of reasons. So Julia is just one. Another really famous one is called the Bloop. There's another one called Slow Down. And initially, when they're released, there's a bit of hype, and people say the same thing. They say it sounds like an animal. But if it's an animal, well, the fact that the distance is covered by the distance that the sound is covered means that you can work out like how loud it was, and the initial volume of the sound means that if it's an animal, you have to imagine it as something that's like 10 times louder than like a blue whale, which is currently the loudest animal on the planet. So you'd have to be talking about like a Godzilla creature, something like way beyond anything that we know. The animal explanation is generally not favoured by the acoustic experts that look at these things, and they say that there are better explanations. The Bloop sounded for a long time like a bubble escaping from an undersea canyon, something which is a recorded phenomenon. And now there's good reason for thinking that these are they're either like the sound of giant icebergs grounding in shallow water, this kind of weird low grating sound, or they are what are called ice quakes, which is where you've got like rumbling noises associated with frozen seafloor or ice shelves, breaking apart and making crazy sounds. Remember that it's called Julia, by the way, because it sounds like Julia.
Oh, I never knew that.
Googie, like this, yeah. But that sound, and this is the same for the others as well, they're all sped up. That sound is like sped up, like I think it's like 10 to 20 times compared to what the actual noise is like. They speed it up just because if you heard it at its original sound, you wouldn't be able to make any sense of it. It'd just be like a low rumbling thing. So I don't think that there's a good reason to think they are animals. If they're animals, they're unprecedented animals. They're like things that must be like hundreds of tons and gargantuan in size. And there are these better explanations that they do match with ice quakes or icebergs or whatever. The link, so obviously it goes viral on the internet, and people love the idea of these being animals. What a fantastic idea! I wish it were true. But they then link them with other things, and I haven't looked into this in depth, but from what I remember, because this is a couple of years, this one's a couple of years old. The Bloop goes back a couple of decades, and Julia goes back to, when did you say? Is it late 1990s?
Let me take a look at my notes here. Actually, I don't have that written down.
I've got a feeling it's 1999, and it was recorded once, but I could be wrong. That was my recollection. The link between whatever the acoustic trace is and the thing with the shadow, no connection whatsoever. It's just someone either, again, I haven't looked into this, but from what I recall, the shadow picture was either something mocked up or it was something that wasn't an animal, but it doesn't have any connection whatsoever to the to the actual sound. I didn't look into this, sorry, but I'm pretty sure that's right. There's no direct connection, and it's connected. Someone does it kind of for fun to start with, and then of course people take it from there. So maybe we should go away and do some googling on that. But that's I'm pretty sure that's right. I'm going to put my money on that. But sadly, I don't think these are animals. That sounds made by animals, and no reason to link them with. Cloverfield is one of my favourite movies. I want a clover,
Absolutely. I'm with you on that
Godzilla.
one.
I love Godzilla as well.
Absolutely, and that'll segue us right into the next question, actually, because we just discussed the sounds. Besides these sounds, because these sounds, as you said, don't seem to have any, they seem to have very logical explanations. But when you push aside these sounds, I mean, is it at all possible that a leviathan of Godzilla proportions could be lurking somewhere in our oceans, unknown to us? I mean, is there any evidence for this? Could it be possible even with that, in the absence of evidence?
Yeah. Is it? I mean, there's always a difference between what's possible and what we think is likely. Is it possible to start with? I mean, for it to be any kind of living thing that's at all similar to sort of like the monsters of movies, Pacific Rim, Godzilla, etc. Well, those are all super predators at the top of the food chain, and they need to be behaving in a way that enables them to take advantage of whatever resources they are. And if you want to be if you are a multi-ton behemoth that's exploiting whatever in order to fuel, hundreds of tons of mass, then that's going to have to be some pretty hefty exertion in the surface waters of the ocean. There probably isn't, so far as we know at the moment, there probably isn't enough stuff to keep, a giant super predator going in the abyssal zone. It's going to have to be something that comes to rich coastal or surface waters. So I would say that while a creature like that is perhaps possible, I'm not sure that it would get much bigger than a blue whale. The fact that we've got blue whales that are, possibly as much as 200 tons, certainly between 100 and 200 tons, can you get a predator bigger than that? I don't know. Possibly not. Possibly that's at the limits of what's energetically possible. But if there were such a creature, I'm saying I think we would see evidence for it. We would know of these things because we would see them in active, in pursuit of prey in fertile regions of the ocean, none of which people have shy away from. They're all places that people have visited and exploited the hell out of. So I don't think there's basically it's like maybe it's just about possible, but there isn't. But if it was a thing, I think we would know about it. And then the second kind of part of this, is there any reason to take it seriously? Is like, well, do we have accounts that describe anything like that? And there are certainly tall tales about people reporting giant, without at the risk of going off at a tangent, I'll try not to, but the legend of the Kraken did not start out as people see in giant squid or octopuses. The octopus and squid type stuff that we think of when we hear the word Kraken was actually quite a late addition to the legend, something that only happened in the late 1700s and in the early 1800s. Before that time, the Kraken is a giant island monster. And people in antiquity, going back thousands of years, they had this concept of the island monster, this thing that looked like as the name suggests, like an island, giant thing, maybe with sort of like tree-like structures growing off the back of it, big enough for people to be able to like land ships on it and walk around on it and stuff. And that is the original Kraken. It's nobody's really sure what it was based on. It could have been inspired by people seeing emergent volcanoes, places where like undersea volcanoes, break through the surface. It could be pumice islands. Pumice, this like very light air-filled rock that's produced by volcanic activity, which can float, and you can have like huge masses of pumice that look like a temporary island on the surface of the sea. Or is it something crazy like a particular kind of whirlpool or something? Are those the explanations for these island monsters? We don't know, but I guess those are the only kind of accounts that I can think of that could possibly be linked with the presence of like a true behemoth, a truly gigantic creature, and what they're based on, I don't know. But I don't think a giant animal is unfortunately the best explanation.
Right. Okay. Cool. Moving away from sea monsters for now. I'd like to talk a little bit about cryptozoology, which is kind of the broader aspect of this whole sea monsters conversation. Again, this has been me and you seem to have very similar interests. I mean, this has been something that's interested me for a very long time. Have you done a lot of in-field cryptozoology work, or has it been more of a kind of research project for you?
Well, kind of both. I mean, I've done what I can. So in the course of the research that I've done over the years as a paleontologist, as a field naturalist, and as a zoologist, I've been to various interesting places, and I've often, I'm interested in everything in the natural world. So if we go to places like obscure parts of the Sahara Desert or Eastern Europe or whatever, far-flung parts of the UK, which has some moderately wild bits around the fringes. If I'm looking for fossils or looking for live animals, doing surveys or whatever, I'll often have the mystery animals in mind. I haven't done dedicated overseas cryptid hunting, monster hunting. Really, I really would love to. Just haven't ever had the opportunity. Just haven't been to those kinds of places. But certainly in the UK, I've for my sins. On many times been around the countryside looking for, particularly for evidence pertaining to the mystery big cats that people claim to see here. So I can say I've got some field experience specifically relevant to mystery animals, but I haven't done the Pacific Northwest or the Gobi Desert looking for the Mongolian deathworm or anything like that. But that's not for want of trying. I would like to. So I've done what local stuff I can, and I have certainly seen various bits of relevant field evidence. Yeah.
So you have done like the finding Bigfoot kind of stuff then out in the field. Could we possibly get an example of that, like of where you went and what you were looking for and what methods you used?
Well, the stuff I can say that I know the best is in the UK, looking for the alien big cats, ABCs we tend to call them. So, the world over, people claim that they see non-native large cat species. Here in the UK, people claim to see pumas or cougars, leopards, typically described as Black Panther type creatures. They also see lynx or bobcat type creatures, none of which are meant to be here, none of which are like officially here, and they say that there are sheep and deer and even bigger animals, cattle and horses on occasion, that are found with evidence for that can be linked to they've been killed by big cats. And researchers have also claimed to have found like dens and tracks and droppings and hairs and all that kind of stuff. So I live in southern England, and in southern England, obviously, huge like urban and suburban area, but there's two like big wild kind of they're famously where there's giant, what we call granite batholiths, these like giant masses of volcanic rock that create a kind of quite a bleak moor-like landscape. And there's two in the west of England, Dartmoor and Exmoor, and they're both associated. They're like hotspots for mystery big cats, the beast of Dartmoor and the beast of Exmoor. And I've been to like those parts of the world and the surrounds, because they're not just, I said they're like sort of bleak moor type environments, but there's lots of like woodlands and thickets and stuff and valleys and everything around those places. And I have specifically spent time in those areas with people who know what they're talking about, with qualified naturalists and, people that are really interested in the British big cat phenomenon, specifically looking either for the animals, and I've never personally seen one myself, or they're looking for field sign. And I've certainly seen a lot of field sign, and it's something where I'm very much on the fence. I do think that some of the evidence is, I wouldn't say compelling, I've sort of become more sceptical about it over time, but I think some of the evidence is pretty good that there are non-native big cats in the UK at times. At least some of the sightings of them are, do relate to actual observations of wild living pumas and leopards. And on the one hand, this is like really kind of boring compared to sea monsters, Loch Ness monsters, Bigfoot, your classic cryptozoology creatures. So, who kind of cares? It's like, the occasional wild puma or leopard in the British Isles. On the other hand, it does have the same flavour and pattern to lots of mystery animal research, which is that for reasons that are not entirely clear at the moment, there is this embedded myth within a culture, and in this particular case, the culture of Western European people, not just British people, but also it's like a thing in sort of France and Germany, a few other places as well, and then the British colonies like Australia and New Zealand, it's a thing there as well. There's this sort of idea that there are phantom panthers, mystery big cats. That does seem to be an embedded kind of cultural thing within some groups of people, and I also think that is really interesting. As I say, not quite clear why that is, but I think that's part of the explanation. The fact that, as with some of the other mystery creatures, people expect them to be that. They expect there to be mysterious big cats, and it's not just a new thing. People have, throughout recent decades, as in going back to sort of the mid 1900s, people have tried to rationalise British big cat sightings. Said, it's because of a specific bit of legislation, typically the 1976 Dangerous Wild Animals Act. That's when all the panthers were released, and that's why there's big cats in the British countryside today. But it's no, the sightings go back way beyond that. There are sort of phantom panthers, mystery big cats that go back hundreds of years before that time. Well into the Middle Ages. There's this idea, say, of phantom panthers that's always there, and it's weird, really weird. Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. And I know you said, it's not quite the classic, your Bigfoot, your Loch Ness Monster, but to be honest, to the contrary, I'm glad you brought that up, because I actually had never heard that before, the big cats in Britain. That one's new for me, so that's pretty cool. It's always nice to learn of a new cryptoid or cryptid, as it may be. So what is the... if we're looking at all of cryptozoology, what is the cryptid that most interests you?
That's kind of hard to answer, because there's so many that I really like, so many that interest me. So
give us a list.
As a list, I would say that the alleged different sea monster species, Loch Ness monster, Bigfoot, Yeti, alleged Congolese, air quotes, living dinosaurs, they all interest me equally. I really can't say. I think there's a huge appeal behind all of them. I mean, Bigfoot is fascinating. I love all the sort of crazy ideas that people have come out with to support it as a real animal. I love the anecdotes, the history of it. But I could say exactly the same about the Loch Ness monster. I could say the same about the various sea monster species, again air quotes there, that some researchers have endorsed. In terms of which seem to have the most kind of zoological backing to them, though, where there's the most fruit to get out of the research that might be possible, I would say that is true for most likely for Bigfoot. There's a reasonable number of qualified researchers who've said really interesting things about what it could be if it's real, what it would mean for hominid evolution and the history of the peopling of the Americas and stuff. I think that's fascinating. And orang pendek from Sumatra, this alleged another kind of hominid, like a bipedal, reddish-furred kind of orangutan-like, but also human-like creature, which has been taken at least semi-seriously or seriously by some professional biologists that have worked out there. I think that's fascinating as well. But yeah, I would struggle to come up with like one favourite. If people ask me what's your favourite mystery animal, I tend to think of something stupid that I don't think is real, like Bat Squatch or Mothman, because they're just like crazy looking creatures. But that's a totally different area, because nobody's really thinking. There's a lot of people that seriously think that the Loch Ness Monster might be a real animal, that Bigfoot might be a real animal, but I don't think anybody's really thinking that Lizard Man or the Loveland Frog or Mothman or the Bat Squatch are actual real flesh and blood animals. I don't know if any of these creatures are familiar to you, but they're all out there in the literature.
Yeah, Slender Man. How about that one?
Exactly. Yeah, that's sort of on the borders. Like, is that cryptozoology? Is that not? I mean, I'm inclined to think no, but it's not a million miles away from something like Bat Squatch.
Yeah. Well, I'm inclined to think that falls into more the category of urban legends, which is also something we like to talk about on this show. But we will avoid that this time. So one of the questions I was going to ask you, which I think you kind of just hinted at it, is what's the cryptid that you think is most likely the real deal? In other words, speaking from a scientific standpoint, most likely that isn't a known animal being mistaken for something else, but an actual unidentified species. And you said Bigfoot? So
I think for is the point that you've always had a number of like qualified primatologists, experts on primates and human evolution and whatnot, that have presented a case that it's real. But I'm quite familiar with that research, and having looked into it, read the research, and come up with ideas myself. I've got a chapter about Bigfoot and other alleged crypto hominids in Hunter Monsters. Sadly, I don't think there just is not the evidence that there really should be to support its validity. In terms of the mystery animals that seem potentially most likely to actually be real, well, when I was writing Hunting Monsters, I very nearly ended up endorsing as likely real the Queensland tiger, which is this alleged striped predatory mammal from northeastern Australia and possibly New Guinea as well, because it's not kind of improbable in terms of what we understand about the sorts of animals that exist in that area. It's in a place where you could just about understand, just about believe that a creature could be hanging out there. You've got some sightings that come from pretty respectable witnesses who seem to know what they were talking about, and you've got one or two bits of good material evidence, like certain trackways and whatnot. But yeah, having looked into that, it's like in the end there just isn't the strong support there should be. And again, I think there's better explanations, and that only leaves orang pendek, which again is this Sumatran alleged hominid, and that's one where I can kind of buy that is something real. I just wish they had better evidence for it, because at the moment basically all they've got is eyewitness reports that come from a part of the world where it's quite possible you could have something new. And I was involved in some research that was being done on some hares that had been recovered, and the initial results coming in from the hares was that this is something new. It's a primate that's a member of the orangutan lineage, and it sort of seemed to fit with the eyewitness evidence. But that research sort of ended up going in another direction that hasn't endorsed existence of the creature. So kind of that's still at the top. That's the top of my list, but I'm not holding out hope that it is actually real. I mean, I've become far more interested now in the idea that cryptozoology is part of part of culture, and that I think it's really interesting, and it's relatively understudied, the fact that people claim encounters with all these creatures because they have the animals sort of embedded in the psyche, embedded in a particular culture, and there isn't really there isn't that much good explanation as to why. It's not totally clear why that is. Why do people say they encounter, Bigfoot type creatures the world over, or Nessie type creatures in big lakes and so on? I do think there are explanations, for those facts. But I think that's a fascinating thing. The fact that people have this expectant attention, it's been called, this they expect to see monsters, and have these particular monsters, air quotes again, monsters, have these particular creatures there in our minds when we go to weird and scary places. I think that's a big deal.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. One cryptid that, because when I was little, it was, Bigfoot. Bigfoot was awesome to me. And as I got older, I discovered this other cryptid, the Jersey Devil. That one's very interesting to me because, you're out in the pine forests of New Jersey. Not much big is out there, and here we've got all these stories of this Jersey Devil. What's your take on the Jersey Devil?
There's a historian called Brian Regal who has recently written a book on the Jersey Devil. I don't think it's out yet, but it's going to be out really soon, and it's another one of these cases where there's like the sort of brief superficial history that's quite easy to read up about, because it's like mentioning all the books on mysterious phenomena, all the books on mystery animals. They talk about the same couple of accounts, the same description of the Jersey Devil, that it's meant to be this horse-headed flying creature with like a long tail, and this one account where the guy looks out of his window and sees it strike a power line and explode, all this kind of stuff. But that is like 5% of the history. And if you look into the story, the original story of the Jersey Devil, it's called the Jersey Devil because it's meant to be born to a particular family that are meant to be cursed because of, I forget all the details, but there's a ton of history written about this. And you look at these accounts, and it's pretty obvious that nobody ever really started this story because they were seeing an unusual animal. They started it as kind of like I think of comparing it to like the Blair Witch, as in the movie. Okay, there isn't really a Blair Witch, because so far as I know, they go to a place called Blair, you talk to some people, and people automatically have this. Everyone has this like myth, this idea that there was this crazy old lady, and she lived in the woods, and she did this and she did that, and someone else says, it was this. They got their own version of what the Blair Witch is. And the Jersey Devil seems to be that kind of thing. It's this sort of amorphous, scary creature linked with a scary place. And then you get these couple of weird accounts written for popular newspapers that are attached to the story relatively late in its history. And I'm guessing the book is going to be called The Jersey Devil, but you will want to check it out when it's published by Brian Regal, and he's a brilliant researcher. He wrote Searching for Sasquatch, really good book on the history of people that have looked for Bigfoot. And I'm pretty compelled by what I've heard him talk about so far. It's the classic of pseudo-cryptozoological cases that we think of when we hear the term Jersey Devil. They're late inventions, and they're nothing to do with the original concepts, and they're fictional. So I don't know about you, but I'm thinking of that picture where it's like standing up on its back legs, and it's got like horse hooves, and it's got its mouth open, and it's got bat wings. Someone just made that up for a newspaper. They didn't see a weird creature and describe it in those terms. So that's what I think.
There's this speaking. I'm glad you brought that picture up because I wanted to talk about this. There's I've seen this theory different places on the internet, and I wanted to ask you about it because I find it really strange. It's interesting, but I'm really skeptical about it. I'm glad you brought that picture up because it's a side by side of that picture and a hammer-headed fruit bat from the Congo in Africa. And then there's, of course, the, air quotes, hypothesis that, people saw this hammer-headed fruit bat in the pine forest of New Jersey. What's a hammer-headed fruit bat doing in New Jersey? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's not impossible that a hammer-headed fruit bat was, flying around in New Jersey. But let's face it, it's pretty unlikely. What's clearly coming here is what's called clutching at straws, which is where somebody has looked at the Jersey Devil accounts with a flesh and blood sort of rationalist perspective. They've said, if it's going to be a real animal, then what could it be? Well, there's a couple of similarities. Obviously, predominantly the shape of the head, the hammer-headed fruit bat, as the name suggests. Males in particular look crazy. That's what they've done. They've said, look, there's this similarity. It's a flying thing. It's got wings. The hammer-headed fruit bat. Could that explain the Jersey Devil? And it's like, well, you're matching like two of the three things, but you're not you're counting the hits, but you're ignoring the misses. And there's more misses than there are hits in this case. So that specifically pertains to that one particular drawing. But what about all the other things associated with with the Jersey Devil? So that particular one sighting, that animal is said to okay, I could be wrong here, I don't remember it in exact detail, but isn't it like standing on its back legs on a roof and opens its mouth wide and makes a noise, and it's got like a super long tail with like a trident or the spike at the end or something like that? Mm-hmm. Okay, do those things sound like a hammer-headed fruit bat? Do they stand on their back legs on roofs in the night, open their mouths at you and have like a super long tail? What about these giant, horse-like forelimbs? What about the hooves that it's got? There's like a whole list of other things, and this is pertaining just to that one particular account. It's like, do they describe a hammer-headed fruit bat? This is a really, the answer is no, they totally don't. This is a really common thing in the cryptozoological literature where people ranging from like experienced veteran researchers, people like your Roy Mackles and Bernard Hoovermans and Carl Schukers, all the way to like your fanboys and girls on the internet. They try and rationalise an explanation by saying, look, it sounds a bit like this. It's like, yeah, it sounds a bit like that, but it doesn't sound enough like that for you to endorse that as the best explanation. And in the case of the Jersey Devil and many of these others, you don't have enough evidence to come to any explanation. There's no reason to think there really is a creature called the Jersey Devil that's really flying around and deserves explanation, let alone explanation via a wayward, one individual or a population of hammer-headed fruit bats. It's like you don't need to come up with that. And as I've said, and as Regal says in this In Press or recently published whatever book, it's like there's this whole backstory that paints it in a completely different light and just shows you that there is not a single consistent entity that's always being described in the same way. I don't know if you remember, there's an episode of The X-Files that's got the Jersey Devil in it, and the Jersey Devil in this story is coming into towns. I forget which town in New Jersey, but it's actually coming right into like urban alleyways and scavenging and everything. And Fox Mulder sort of forms a bond with one of these creatures, and the whole story is Jersey Devil, Jersey Devil. They talk about the Jersey Devil the whole way through. Well, the Jersey Devil in that episode of The X-Files is a wild person. It's like their version of the Jersey Devil for The X-Files was something that elsewhere within the canon of cryptozoological fiction and science fiction-y writing, elsewhere that would be a creature that you would describe as a skunk ape or a Bigfoot or certainly a hominid of some kind. And the fact there, I think, is not that the X-Files done the Jersey Devil wrong, not that they got it wrong, it's that the Jersey Devil does not have a specific, honed, specific anatomical consistency. It's a vague amorphous concept. There's some kind of creature in the woods. It's scary, it's dark, it might be able to fly, whatever, doesn't matter. I think that is true for so many of these creatures, and it makes it quite unrealistic when people then do try and go too far in rationalising, because that's what makes cryptozoology. Could the Chupacabras actually be, an undiscovered species of giant bipedal spiky-backed opossum or something? It's like, no, you just don't need to go down that avenue.
Right. The Chupacabra ended up being some, most likely hairless dog, with mange or something like that. I remember seeing that's like the new theory, isn't it, or the new hypothesis?
Well, that's what's happened to it now. So when the Chupacabra originally, as witnessed on Puerto Rico, was a humanoid creature that is very obviously based on the character from the movie Species. I've forgotten the name of the. Did you know that? I hate that film. It's a terrible film.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
She's called like Sylph or something. She's this like horrible xenomorph style sexual predator.
Yeah.
And sort of spikes on the back like the Giga xenomorph alien, and sort of some like ribbed predator. But then when for some reason the term Chupacabra went to the mainland, went to Florida, to Miami initially, people started saying they're seeing Chupacabra in Miami. First of all, they say they're seeing a spiky-backed creature. It's predatory. It's quite scary. Very similar to the grey aliens of the, ufology literature. And then, as it sort of moves west, people kind of forget about this sort of humanoid, spiky-backed aspect, and they change the term to apply to these so-called blue dogs, which are now have obviously been filmed and captured, and people have even got dead ones, and they've done DNA analysis on them and all kinds of stuff. There's all kinds of ideas on what those animals are, but quite why they've become the Chupacabra, and yet the original thing, going back to Puerto Rico, is some like humanoid, terrifying entity. Very, very weird, but again, it's consistent with the idea these are sort of like vague, amorphous sort of cultural concepts. They're not specifically descriptions of, like one unknown creature.
Right. Awesome. And one more, while we're still on cryptozoology, I just want to ask one more question pertaining to that, and then we'll move into the final question and get this wrapped up. Because we were talking about Bigfoot earlier, and I couldn't end this interview without asking this question. The Patterson footage of Bigfoot. So much controversy surrounds it. What are your thoughts on it?
I'm sure we could talk for hours about Patterson footage. I love the background to the story, all the biographical research that now exists on Patterson and Bob Giblin and the other people involved, and Aldi Aitley, and the investigation that was done on the footage afterwards, I almost don't know where to start when I talk about the Patterson footage. So to keep it as brief as possible, for a while I did think that like a list of about 10 aspects of anatomy that you see in the footage are best explained by it being an unknown non-human hominid. And I found it pretty compelling, the fact that you can sort of see, muscle definition, the fur looks realistic, it's obviously a female, the way the breasts move is really realistic, the gait, the height, the size of the creature, all that stuff. I think a pretty good case can be made that looks like a real animal and it looks like a non-human. And I would say, taking the film alone on its merits, that is probably where I would still be. I think that's really hard to explain. It's really good. It's kind of, well done bit of footage. But the film does not exist in isolation. And we have now got so much additional information on all the people involved. And I don't know if you've read Greg Long's The Making of Bigfoot. It's okay, well, it's kind of if you're really interested in the Patterson footage, if you're really interested in Bigfoot, you kind of should read it. But I hate it. It's a really apologies to Greg, but it's so awful. It's like the worst book I've ever read. It's just the way it's done. And if I tell you why it's so bad, I'd go off on another tangent, because it's like he wrote his life story, where he wrote his story about this investigation as if it was going to be the script for a film. And it talks about him like, he goes and talks to this person, and then he stops and goes to a restaurant and has a meal, and it'll talk about him having a meal and stuff. It's like, come on, and the book is just full of that. It makes it terrible. However, right, that's the tangent. What the book is mostly about is this huge amount of background biographical information on Patterson and the people that Patterson knew and was involved with during his life. And what's really interesting is, from the kind of like pro-Bigfoot point of view, Patterson is meant to be this guy who, we know he had some interest in Bigfoot. We know he wrote a book about Bigfoot prior to actually getting the footage in '67. But the story is that, he goes into the woods with this camera with his friend Bob Gimlin, and they're really lucky, and oh my god, they get this amazing bit of footage. And then Patterson spends the rest of his life, up until his premature death, trying to get more evidence for this. Right, that's the sort of pro Bigfoot point of view. What Long shows is that Patterson was like a really interesting guy. He was like working for decades on various schemes to kind of like different sort of money-making schemes. I don't want to sort of say he was dishonest or a bad person. Long certainly does do that. He tries to basically indulge in character assassination. But Patterson, his whole life was involved in sort of failed attempts to sort of basically make a quick buck and exploit other people. And a lot of this was based around Bigfoot. Clearly interested in Bigfoot, was clearly using Bigfoot to try and, sort of basically get some cash coming in. And Patterson was brilliant. He was like amazing at making stuff. He was an amazing artist. There's loads of stories about him making things, like really skilled. A whole bunch of things. I don't go off a tangent again, but it's clear that he had a firm idea of what Bigfoot was meant to be and what it was meant to look like. And in 1966, so before the footage is filmed in October '67, Patterson published an illustration that's meant to depict William Roe's Bigfoot encounter that's meant to have happened in 1955. And it comes from Canada. We don't actually know that Roe had the encounter in '55 because he didn't write about it until after the Bigfoot stuff kicked off in California. Roe didn't come forward until I think it's '58. But Roe described basically Patty from the Patterson footage. So again, an obviously female Bigfoot. And Patterson '66 draws a scene where William Roe is meant to be like looking at this female Bigfoot through a gun, and the Bigfoot is walking in a certain way. She's got certain physical features that make her look a certain way, and basically this '66 illustration is the Patterson footage. It's flipped the other way. The animal's going from right to left instead of from left to right as it does in the Patterson footage. And you could say that's a complete coincidence that Patterson draws a scene that looks exactly like the actual footage a year before he gets it. But when you add it to all this other stuff, the fact that he's interested in making money out of Bigfoot for years, the fact that he's brilliant in terms of making stuff, if someone's going to hoax Bigfoot well, it's really possible it could be him. The fact that Long does compile this body of evidence showing that a man called Bob Hieronymus was likely the guy in the suit, I'm sort of a bit ambivalent on that. I can believe it, but I'm not necessarily attached to it. I think there's a really strong circumstantial case now that, in actual fact, Patterson did a good job, got it right, did it really well, produced something that looks great, but all this circumstantial evidence stands against him. And I really want Bigfoot to be true. I wish the Patterson footage is real, but no, I don't think it is. I think Patterson pulled off an outstandingly good hoax, and you've got the fact that nobody since has produced anything close to it. You've got a bunch of other films, for sure, quite a lot of them. None of them are any good. None of them are anywhere close to as good as the Patterson film is. And they're all attached to characters who have been found, not mentioning any names, but they're all attached to people who are known to have hoaxed things. So, what do you think about the Patterson footage?
Well, I'm kind of with you. It's like it's the same thing. The footage itself, when you take the footage away from the circumstances, it is somewhat compelling. You've got, it's very grainy, obviously, so when people zoom, it's hard to tell sometimes what's going on, but, like some analysts have said, the facial muscles seem to move, the glutes seem to move, just all this, things to do with anatomy and things like that. So when I'm kind of where you're coming from. When the footage is taken by itself, it's compelling. But when you have all these circumstantial things, all the stuff you were talking about, there was a guy on a National Geographic episode of Is It Real a long time ago who claimed to be the guy in the suit. Plus this case you laid out, it definitely does kind of make you think, it is interesting that the guy so interested in Bigfoot and so interested in making money from Bigfoot got a video of Bigfoot. It's hard to believe it's a coincidence. So I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, and he's the only one to ever do it. He goes looking for Bigfoot and he finds Bigfoot.
Right.
And he doesn't just find Bigfoot, he gets the best bit of footage ever. So
right.
I don't want to endorse sales of Greg Long's book. But seriously, check it out. The making of Bigfoot, terribly badly written book, but there's stuff that you have to take on board. And we're at a time in the Bigfoot research community where the people that now support the existence of Bigfoot are so absolutely committed to the idea that it's like real and that their view of it is valid that they would like all copies of that book to be destroyed. Wish it didn't even exist.
Right.
And it's like, no, sorry, there is a case there that has to be taken on board. And I am familiar with the opposite case. I have read the work of people like Grover Krantz, and I've read Bill Munns's book when Patty met. When Roger met Patty, which is his argument. Bill Munns is like a model maker and movie special effects guy, and he thinks based on his expertise, model maker, he's absolutely convinced that the Patterson is real. But it's like, yeah, that's really interesting. You got a load of good stuff there, but it's like it does not count against this other evidence that we have.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely, great. Yeah. Well, good stuff. And final question before we go, I wanted to talk about, I'd like to talk a little bit about the dinosaur that you discovered, Eotyrannus. Its name means dawn tyrant. Could you go into detail about how you discovered Eotyrannus and what the discovery entails?
Yeah, so outside of cryptozoology and mystery animal research, I work on several different groups of like long extinct animals. One of them is predatory dinosaurs, theropods, and in particular the theropods of the lower Cretaceous of southern England. So these animals are around about 130 million years old, and a kind of I was given back in the late 90s was to revise what we knew about the smaller theropods of southern England. And I don't know if you know, this probably is not well known outside of the UK, but southern England, particularly the Isle of Wight, which is just off the coast, and adjacent parts of the mainland, one of the richest dinosaur-bearing sites in the world. From this small area, we've got like over 30 species of Cretaceous dinosaurs, and there are a whole bunch of small theropods, all named from bits and pieces. Like one is named for leg bones, one is named for neck vertebrae, one is named for bones from the hip. I was sorting these animals out for my what's called an MPhil thesis, and the news came in that on the Isle of Wight a new theropod from this particular group of rocks I'm interested in. They're called the Wealden rocks. From the Wealden, a new kind of theropod had been found. I was like, wow, this is amazing. This one sounds like it's going to be the holy grail. It's like maybe it shows all the other bits and pieces actually belong to one animal. We went and checked it out. I was doing my work under a paleontologist based at the University of Portsmouth called David Martill, and we had a good working relationship with the Museum of Isle of Wight Geology, led by a guy called Steve Hutt. And Steve was prepping, breaking the rocks and stuff off this new theropod, and it proved to be something completely new. It didn't match any of the existing bits from the region, and we recognised straight away from a few characteristic bones of the skull in particular that it's a member of the Tyrannosaur lineage. It's an early Tyrannosaur, and at that time, the late Cretaceous tyrannosaurs, animals like Tyrannosaurus and its relatives, they're well known, they're gigantic, they got a bunch of unusual specializations, really short forelimbs, 2 fingers, particularly thick skull bones, banana-shaped teeth. This was like an early sort of prototype member of the family. An animal with a skull, say probably like 30 centimeters long, and with really long arms and very long 3-fingered hands. And it was actually found by a guy called Gavin Lang, who was always pretty good at finding stuff on the southern coast of the Isle of Wight. And in recognition for him finding this animal, it's named after him, so we called it Eotyrannus langi, named after Gavin Lang. And over the next several years, got it out of the rock as best as we could and wrote it up, published a preliminary paper which was published in 2001. And for my PhD thesis, I kind of wrote up the whole thing, wrote the whole anatomy in detail, and tried to work out exactly where it fitted in the family tree. Of course, we're going through this golden age of dinosaur discoveries where there's like more than 50 new species named a year, and in the time that I was working, the number of early tyrannosaurs went from 2 to 15. There's now quite a few early tyrannosaurs, and working out where Eotyrannus fit within that lot has proved an interesting task. We do sort of have some idea. It's no longer like an especially early kind of primitive tyrannosaur. It's now sort of somewhere in the middle of the tyrannosaur radiation, because we know a far older, sort of earlier, less specialised tyrannosaurs that are from 50 million years older. They come from the middle Jurassic. But it's a bit of an embarrassment to me today that I still haven't published this giant work on Eotyrannus. It has been done. It's been written up in full, and its anatomy is quite well understood. But right now I publish several technical papers a year, but I haven't had time to finish and publish the technical work on Eotyrannus, despite the fact that it was finished in 2006-ish. This just fitting big academic projects into life, is really hard when you doing so many other things and trying to make a living and looking after your family and everything. So I'll get there eventually, but it's one of Britain's most exciting and interesting dinosaurs, and you should imagine a 2-legged predator, around about say 4.5 meters long, that's got long arms, long grabbing hands. It's got a very strong bite, very robust skull, quite a fast runner. It's got very lightly built hind limbs, and is one of a number of early tyrannosaurs that aren't really anything like the specialised late Cretaceous tyrannosaurs that we know of. So fits somewhere within this really fascinating story, the rise of tyrannosaurs.
Awesome. What period would he exist?
It's from the what we call the early Cretaceous. So the Cretaceous is the span of time from, looking at my time chart on the wall, obviously I know it, I'm just making sure I get it exactly right, from 145 until 66 million years ago, and Eotyrannus is from early on in the Cretaceous, so it's from round about 135 million years ago. And the Cretaceous is broken into an upper section and a lower section, so the late and early Cretaceous, and then those big chunks are split into separate stages, which in the Cretaceous are Berriasian, Valanginian, Halterivian, Bremian, Aptian, Albian, Cenomanian, Turonian, Coniacean, Santonian, Campanian, Maastrichtian. And your famous late Cretaceous dinosaurs like Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus, they come from the Maastrichtian. They come from the very last part of the late Cretaceous. Eotyrannus is from like sort of 50 million years older. It's from rocks that belong to a part of the early Cretaceous called the Barremian. And virtually all of these dinosaurs that I've said are found in the rocks of southern England, they're all about that age. They're all about 130-ish million years ago. So things like Iguanodon, the armoured dinosaur Polycanthus, the long-skulled fish-eating Baryonyx. These animals, they're all about that age. So a really rich and diverse dinosaur fauna, and how these animals actually interact with one another is a really fascinating subject, and one of those things where, you know, there's more questions about dinosaurs that we have and can't answer than we have answered. You know, there's so much stuff that we just don't have the information to answer, but we really would like to have that information. We're working on it, of course.
Right.
You know, when you've got like each one of these faunas has got like sort of 4 or 5 predators living at the same time and place, there must be really interesting story of like, you know, how they avoid each other, how they compete with one another, how the evolution of one affects the evolution of another, that kind of thing. That would be a big part of the story here, yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, well, I think that about wraps it up. Darren, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, and I do have a tendency to sort of go off on tangents and drone on a bit. So good luck with the editing. It was great to talk to you. Really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for inviting me.
For everyone listening, please be sure to check the video description for a link to Dr. Naish's book, Hunting Monsters, Cryptozoology, and the Reality Behind the Myths, as well as a link to his blog, Tetrapod Zoology. As always, I would greatly appreciate you spreading the word about this show. Be sure to also sign up for our newsletter for updates on new content, link in the description for that as well. I hope to see you all back again. Stay tuned for more content. Thanks again for joining us. Good night.